My stepdad was coming into my room at night, and my mom knew but did nothing, so I told my teacher everything. And when my mom found out, she started turning me against her and convincing me that the things with my stepdad I was making up. I was 12 years old when my mom hired Maria to babysit, and I immediately hated her. Not because she wasn't nice, she was, and not because she didn't play games with me, she did, but because she couldn't stand how close I was with my stepdad, Rick. Rick was a police officer who'd moved in 3 months ago and basically became my new dad. He bought me princess dresses, took me to Disney movies, and bought me popcorn that reached the ceiling, always kept me safe. But it was like Maria had a crush on him or something, because anytime we got close, she'd pop up out of nowhere and wedge me out of the conversation. If he sat next to me on the couch, she'd suddenly need me to help in the kitchen. When he offered to drive me to gymnastics, she'd insist on coming along. And one time when I left my room to go visit Rick in the garden, she yanked my wrist so hard it almost left marks. And 12-year-old me might have been dumb, but I was by no means a pushover. So after 2 weeks of this, I asked Rick why Maria was being such an attention seeker. But Rick was kind. He told me that it wasn't her fault, because her father was dead, which meant she couldn't help but be jealous. At the time, it didn't make sense to me because her lock screen was a photo of her and her dad, but I figured that Daddy Rick knew better than me, so I just shrugged it off. But the next day, it happened again. My parents were both supposed to be working the night shift, but Rick's was canceled, which meant Maria was still on duty. Before I went to bed, he told me to meet him at the front entrance of our home at 10 p.m. because he wanted to take me on a late-night McDonald's run. So when the time came, I tiptoed as quietly as my little feet could manage. But just as I made it down the hall, Maria materialized out of nowhere and grabbed me by both shoulders, lifting me completely off the ground. I kicked and squirmed, but she carried me like a football back to my room, her fingers digging into my arms so hard I could feel each individual fingertip pressing into my skin. And just as I was about to scream, she covered her hand over my mouth and put me back to bed. "You'll understand when you're older," was all she said before closing the door shut. But 12-year-old me was fed up, like really fed up. So much so that I told the police. The police being Daddy Rick, that is. As soon as I told him, his face dropped. He took photos of the marks on my arms from where she grabbed me. As soon as my mom woke up from her midday slumber, they unanimously agreed to fire her. They even threatened to press charges if she ever came near us again. They both decided a babysitter wasn't necessary anymore, and they'd simply line up their work rosters to make sure I was never home alone. Good riddance. But instead of my life getting better like I thought it would, it got worse. With Maria gone, Daddy Rick didn't need me to sneak into his room anymore. He came to mine instead. The first night he sat on my bed and rubbed my back saying he was checking on his princess. His hands went under my nightgown and I froze. He said this was what daddies who really love their daughters did, but it had to be our secret. But like I said, I was anything but a pushover. So the next day when it was my mom's turn to stay home, I told her everything. Her face tilted and she sighed. "Oh honey, Maria really did manipulate you into telling these crazy stories, didn't she?" The way she asked it made me feel like I could only give one answer. Yes, but I didn't care. "No mom, I'm telling the truth. This is because of Maria. Right honey?" Her tone shifted from slightly loving to extremely aggressive. I went silent. That was the moment my childhood ended. From there, Rick only got worse. He installed a new lock on my door that only locked from the outside. Said it was for my safety. He came up with a new rule that I could only wear the clothes he bought for me around the house. Princess nightgowns and tutus that were a size too small. Mom convinced herself that it was sweet that he was so involved in my life. I started writing letters to Maria about everything that was going on, but she never responded. But the worst night was after my 9th birthday. Rick came in drunk and did things that made me throw up after. He got angry about the mess and made me clean it myself. Said if I told anyone they'd never believe me, just like nobody believed Maria. But that week, Maria reached out. She disguised it as a postcard under the name of my best friend in school. Told me that my parents had blackmailed her into stopping communication with me. As I kept reading, I saw that she told me to check inside the old teddy bear she gave me before getting fired, and when I did, I felt a smile light up my face, because inside was a tiny recording device and a note. "Hide this under your bed. I'm coming to get you." Except I never got to use it. My teacher, Ms. Jackson, kept me after school the next day. She'd noticed the bruises on my thighs during gym class, asked gentle questions until everything poured out of me. Maria, Rick, my mom, everything. The words came faster and faster until I was sobbing in her arms, finally feeling safe for the first time since Maria left. Ms. Jackson held me while I cried until I couldn't cry anymore. She gave me tissues from the box on her desk and waited until my breathing got normal again. Then she told me we needed to go to the principal's office. I begged her not to tell anyone, but she said she had to. She said it was the law. The principal was this older guy with gray hair who always wore the same brown suit. He listened to Ms. Jackson explain what I'd told her, and his face got more and more serious. He made some phone calls while Ms. Jackson sat with me. I heard him say words like mandatory reporter and emergency removal. My stomach felt like it was full of rocks. About an hour later, 2 people showed up. A woman and a man, both wearing regular clothes but carrying official-looking badges. They said they were from Child Protective Services. The woman had short blonde hair and introduced herself as Jennifer. The man was younger and said his name was Kyle. They took me to a small conference room and asked me to tell them everything. I told them about Rick coming to my room, about the lock on my door, about the clothes he made me wear, about my mom not believing me. Jennifer wrote everything down in a notebook while Kyle asked gentle questions. They took photos of the bruises on my thighs and arms. Jennifer asked if there were bruises anywhere else and I nodded. They called in a nurse to do a full exam. The nurse was nice. Her name was Frances and she had a soft voice. She took photos of every mark and bruise. She put them in a special envelope and sealed it. She told me I was brave. I didn't feel brave. I felt scared. While all this was happening, the principal called my parents. I could hear him on the phone in his office next door. He told them I was being kept after school for a disciplinary issue. issue, and they needed to come pick me up. He didn't mention CPS. Jennifer said this was so they couldn't prepare or coach me on what to say. Rick showed up first. He was still in his police uniform, and I could see him through the window talking to the principal. His face looked calm, but his hands were clenched. The principal told him to wait in the main office. Standard procedure, he said. Rick didn't like that, but he couldn't argue without looking suspicious. My mom arrived about 20 minutes later. She looked tired from her shift and confused about why she'd been called in. She saw Rick in the office and went to sit with him. I watched them through the window. He was whispering something to her, and her face was getting pale. Jennifer and Kyle finished their questions and told me I'd done the right thing by telling Ms. Jackson. They said I wouldn't be going home tonight. Instead, I'd be staying with a foster family while they investigated. The rocks in my stomach turned into boulders. They brought my parents into a different room to talk to them. I could hear my mom's voice getting louder through the walls. She was saying this was all a misunderstanding, that Maria had put ideas in my head before she left, that I was confused and making things up for attention. Rick's voice was calmer. He sounded concerned and confused, playing the perfect stepfather. Jennifer came back and told me they were placing me in emergency foster care. She said it was just temporary while they figured things out. She gave me a bag with some basic clothes and toiletries that they kept for situations like this. None of my princess dresses, thank God. The foster family lived about 30 minutes away. It was an older couple named Lawrence and Diane who'd been doing this for years. Their house smelled like cookies and had photos of all the kids they'd fostered over the years covering one wall. They showed me to a small bedroom with a twin bed and a dresser. It was plain but clean. No locks on the door. That first night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I expected to hear footsteps in the hall, expected the door to open, but it stayed closed. Diane brought me warm milk around midnight when she heard me crying. She didn't ask questions, just sat on the edge of the bed until I fell asleep. The next few days were a blur of meetings and interviews. I had to tell my story over and over to different people. Social workers, therapists, some kind of special investigator. Each time it got a little easier, but also a little harder, like picking at a scab. My mom and Rick hired a lawyer. His name was Philip something, and he wore expensive suits. He started telling everyone that I was troubled, that I'd been acting out since my real dad left, that Maria had filled my head with lies because she was obsessed with Rick and jealous of our family. They had supervised visits at the CPS office. My mom would cry and beg me to tell the truth. She'd say she missed me and wanted me to come home, that we could be a family again if I just stopped telling these lies. Rick would sit there looking hurt and confused. He'd ask why I was doing this to him when he'd been nothing but good to me. During one visit, my mom went to the bathroom. The supervisor was a young guy who was reading something on his phone. I noticed my mom had left her purse on the table. Her phone was sticking out of the side pocket. I grabbed it quick and started scrolling through her texts. There were messages between her and Rick from the night before. He was telling her to stay calm, that their lawyer would handle everything, that once they got me back, they'd move somewhere fresh, start over where nobody knew us. My mom had written back that she was scared. Rick told her to trust him, that he'd handled situations like this before. The supervisor noticed me with the phone and took it away. He didn't see what I'd been reading, just told me I shouldn't touch other people's things. I tried to tell him about the messages, but he said to save it for my caseworker. When I told Jennifer about the text, she said she'd look into it, but without screenshots or proof, it was just my word. And my word wasn't worth much against a police officer and a nurse. Maria showed up at the first custody hearing. I almost didn't recognize her. She looked older somehow, tired. She had a folder full of papers and a man with her who turned out to be a private investigator named Logan. She tried to tell the judge about why she'd been fired, how she'd noticed things that worried her, how Rick was always trying to be alone with me, how my mom refused to see what was happening. But Philip, the expensive lawyer, objected to everything, said Maria had no right to be there, that she was a disgruntled former employee trying to get revenge. Maria had photos, though. Pictures of gifts Rick had bought me that seemed innocent but weren't. Lingerie disguised as dress-up clothes. Movies that were way too old for me. She had timestamps showing when Rick was supposedly at work, but was actually home alone with me. The judge agreed to look at them but said they needed more investigation. My mom stood up in court and said Maria was lying, that she'd always been jealous of their family, that she'd tried to seduce Rick, and when he rejected her, she'd decided to destroy them. She cried pretty tears and said she just wanted her daughter back. The foster family had to write reports about how I was doing. Diane told them about my nightmares, how I'd wake up screaming, how I flinched when Lawrence moved too fast or came up behind me, how I wouldn't eat certain foods because they reminded me of dinners with Rick. The court-appointed therapist said I showed signs of trauma, but couldn't definitively say what caused it. During supervised visits, my mom started getting meaner. When the supervisor wasn't paying attention, she'd lean in close and whisper that I was ruining everything, that I'd destroyed our family, that when I came home, things would be different. Rick would just stare at me with this look that made my skin crawl. I started writing everything down in a journal Diane gave me. Every threat, every whispered comment, every look. The therapist said it would help me process things. I think she just wanted documentation. Maria kept investigating. Her private investigator Logan found out that Rick had lived in 3 different states in the past 10 years, always moving after a few years, always leaving quickly. In one state, he dated a woman with a young daughter. That woman, Brenda, had filed a police report saying her daughter told her Rick was touching her, but then they'd suddenly moved away, and the case was dropped. Logan tracked Brenda down. She was living in a small apartment 2 states away. Maria went to see her. Brenda was terrified. She wouldn't testify. Said Rick had threatened to unalive them both if she ever spoke up. Said he had cop friends everywhere who would help him. But she gave Maria the old police reports, proof that this wasn't the first time. When Maria tried to submit this evidence, Philip got it thrown out. Said it was hearsay. Said it had nothing to do with the current case. That Rick had never been charged with anything. The judge agreed. Past allegations without convictions couldn't be used as evidence. I heard Diane and Lawrence talking one night when they thought I was asleep. The caseworker coworker was suggesting reunification might be possible, that with therapy and supervision, I could go home, that my mom was doing everything right, going to parenting classes, individual therapy, couples counseling with Rick, playing the perfect concerned parent. I felt like I was drowning, like no matter how loud I screamed, nobody could hear me. Maria was trying, but the system was working against her, against us. Then my mom made a mistake. She'd started texting Maria, threatening her, telling her to back off or she'd sue her for harassment, saying she knew where Maria lived, that accidents happened all the time. Maria saved every message. Rick made his own mistake. He'd been moving money around, setting up new bank accounts, buying things that could easily be sold. Logan noticed him visiting a storage unit late at night. When he followed up, he found Rick had been packing boxes, getting ready to run. Maria begged the judge for an emergency hearing, said she had evidence they were planning to flee with me. The judge said to wait for the scheduled court date. 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks of supervised visits where my mom and Rick could perfect their act. I was losing hope. Every night I prayed to God to send someone to believe me, to save me. I didn't care who, just someone who could see the truth. During therapy, I broke down completely. I told my therapist, Dr. Winter, about Ms. Jackson, how she was the first person I'd trusted, how she'd noticed when nobody else did, how I wished I could talk to her again. Dr. Winter wrote it all down. As a mandated reporter, she had to document everything. The next week, Ms. Jackson was brought in to testify. She told them about finding me after class, about the bruises she'd seen, about how I'd broken down and told her everything without any prompting. Philip tried to say she'd led me on, that she'd planted ideas, but Ms. Jackson had kept detailed notes, time-stamped, dated, everything I'd said in my own words. Rick must have felt the walls closing in. He sent me a letter through my mom during a visit. The supervisor didn't check it because it was just a card. Inside, it talked about being a family again, about putting this misunderstanding behind us, about how much he missed his special princess, about all the fun things we'd do when I came home. To anyone else, it might have seemed sweet. To me, it was a threat. I showed Diane the letter. I was sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. She read it and her face went white. She called Jennifer immediately. They documented everything, the phrasing, the implied promises, the subtle threats hidden in loving words. My mom was panicking. The final hearing was coming up and things weren't looking good for them. She asked to meet with Maria, said she wanted to work things out. Maria agreed but recorded it. In our state, you only need one person's consent to record. They met at a coffee shop. My mom offered Maria money to go away, to drop everything, to stop trying to get custody. Maria asked why she should do that. My mom broke down, said Rick had problems, that she knew he had issues but she loved him, that she couldn't lose him, that she'd watch him better if they could just get me back. Maria asked her directly if she knew what Rick had been doing to me. My mom got quiet. Then she said she'd seen him leaving my room at night sometimes, but that she'd convinced herself he was just checking on me, being a good father, that she couldn't believe, wouldn't believe. Maria had what she needed, an admission that my mom knew something was wrong but chose Rick over protecting me, that she'd seen the signs but ignored them, that she was willing to put me back in danger just to keep her relationship. At the final hearing, everything came together. Ms. Jackson's testimony about my unprompted disclosure, the letter from Rick with its hidden threats, the recording of my mom admitting she knew Rick was dangerous, Maria's evidence of Rick's past behavior and plans to flee. Rick saw which way things were going. In a last-ditch effort to save himself, he turned on my mom, said she knew everything, that she'd encouraged it, that she'd told him I needed a father figure, that she'd ignored obvious signs because she didn't want to be alone again. My mom's perfect parent act crumbled. She screamed at Rick, called him a liar. Then, finally, the truth came out. She admitted she'd seen him leaving my room, admitted she'd noticed the clothes he bought me were inappropriate, admitted she'd heard me crying at night but told herself it was just bad dreams, admitted she'd chosen him over me because she couldn't face being a single mom again. The judge ordered immediate termination of parental rights. Criminal charges were filed. Rick was arrested right there in the courtroom. My mom was arrested for child endangerment and failure to protect. Maria was granted emergency custody with the path to permanent guardianship. When the judge said those words, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months. The police searched Rick's computer and found exactly what you'd expect to find. Photos, videos, evidence that made even the seasoned detective sick. They also found communications with other predators, a whole network of monsters. My mom took a plea deal, 3 years in prison, lifetime loss of parental rights, mandatory therapy. She'd never be allowed to work with children again. At her sentencing, she tried to apologize to me, said she was sorry for not protecting me, for not believing me, for choosing him. I didn't respond. Some things can't be fixed with sorry. Rick got 25 years. The prosecutor said he'd probably die in prison, that cops who hurt kids don't do well inside. I didn't feel bad about that, not even a little. Maria's house was different from what I remembered. Quieter, safer. She'd turned her spare room into a bedroom for me, painted it yellow because she remembered it was my favorite color. No princess stuff, no pink, just normal kid decorations. The first night there, I couldn't sleep. I kept waiting for footsteps, for the door to open. Maria sat outside my room in the hallway all night just so I'd know someone was there, someone was watching, someone would keep me safe. Therapy was hard. Dr. Winter said it would take years to process everything, that healing wasn't linear, that some days would be harder than others. She was right. Some days I couldn't get out of bed. Other days I felt almost normal. Ms. Jackson stayed in touch. She sent cards and letters, came to my therapy graduations, reminded me that speaking up had been brave, that telling the truth had been the right thing to do. She became like a big sister to me. Maria never tried to replace my mom. She was just Maria. She helped with homework, made my favorite foods, took me to movies that were actually age appropriate, let me be a kid again, let me be angry, let me be sad, let me heal at my own pace. I found out later that Maria had spent her entire savings on the private investigator, that she'd taken out loans to pay for lawyers, that she'd never given up on me even when everyone said she was crazy, even when my parents threatened her. her, even when the system failed us both. She told me why she'd tried so hard to keep me away from Rick that night. She'd recognized the signs because the same thing had happened to her cousin when they were kids. She'd tried to tell my mom her concerns but was dismissed. When she grabbed me that night, she was desperate. She knew what he had planned. She'd been trying to protect me the only way she could. I asked her why she didn't just call CPS herself. She said she'd thought about it, but she was young and scared. She thought my mom would believe her if she just explained properly. She thought Rick being a cop meant nobody would believe her anyway. She'd been gathering evidence when they fired her. The recording device in the bear was supposed to be proof. We stayed in touch with Diane and Lawrence. They said I was one of their success stories, that most kids in the system don't get justice, don't get safe homes, don't get people like Maria who fight for them. I know how lucky I was, how easily this could have ended differently. My mom got out after serving 2 years. Good behavior. She sent letters asking to see me, saying she'd changed, that she'd gotten therapy, that she understood now what she'd done wrong. Maria left it up to me. I said no. Some bridges are meant to stay burned. Rick died in prison after serving 5 years. Another inmate found out what he was in for. I didn't feel anything when I heard. Not relief, not sadness, just nothing. He'd already taken enough from me. He didn't deserve my emotions too. I'm in college now, studying to be a social worker. I want to be the person who believes kids, who sees the signs, who fights for them when nobody else will. Maria says I'll be good at it, that my experience, as horrible as it was, will help me save others. I still have nightmares sometimes, still flinch at unexpected touches, still struggle with trust. But I also have good days. Days where I forget to be afraid, days where I feel normal, days where I'm grateful to be alive and safe and loved. Maria legally adopted me when I turned 16. We had a small ceremony at the courthouse. Just us, Ms. Jackson, Diane and Lawrence, and Dr. Winter. When the judge finalized it, Maria cried. Said she'd wanted to be my mom from the moment she'd had to let me go that night. People sometimes ask if I hate my biological mom. I don't. I pity her. She chose a monster over her own child. She'll have to live with that forever.